Welcome to the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast, presented by Vox DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin.
Stephon Gilmore go to the Patriots. Now they let Mike Gillislee go to the Patriots. Are they now just the farm club within their own division?
Greg.
He's one of these faux leading women. It's like, that's not Angelina Jolie or Jennifer Aniston. It's some girl that I would see at the Circle K. That's kind of Alshon Jeffrey.
And Ryan.
There is absolutely no reason why O.J. Howard should be drafted before Cameron Brate. All right, everybody, welcome to the Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullroot, and what a day it was in fantasy football today. A lot of players you expected to play pretty well or seem to have good matchups didn't play like they had good matchups. Le'Veon Bell, although he did, sit out all of training camp.
Yeah.
There were some other guys that just did not perform, and a few guys that came out of nowhere that we will definitely be talking about as well. So let's go ahead and get this show started and kind of cover some of the big news stories of the day. The Jaguars have made it official. Wide receiver Allen Robinson has torn his ACL. He is out for the season. What sucks even more for Allen Robinson is this was his contract year.
Yeah, it's unfortunate anytime anyone goes out for the season, especially ACL tears seem to be a very common injury in preseason and before the season starts. And you and I have debated about why that is off air, but this is very, very unfortunate for Allen Robinson. I think this is also very, very bad for Blake Bortles and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Though Allen Robinson had some issues last year and Bortles some chemistry things, I think they really needed him this year, and it's unfortunate. I think this really damages Blake Bortles' ability to play throughout the whole season. They'll move to Henne sometime soon.
Oh no, I think if anything, really, what this does this will just make it a more of a run-heavy Fournette offense. Really, I think is what it does. So. In terms of wide receiver, the two, Allen Robinson or Allen Hurns and Marquise Lee are the two guys that'll step up. I like Marquise Lee better. He seemed to have, at least last season, had a little more connection with Blake Bortles, but we'll kind of see how that goes. I know that, we talked about 2 years ago, it was Allen Hurns. So, for all of those who had the number one pick in their drafts, David Johnson was sent to the locker room today. It is not broken. His wrist is not broken, but he was writhing in pain. He will obviously miss at least next week. He is having an MRI tomorrow, Monday, for those of you who are listening on iTunes, to determine whether he will miss a few weeks or half the season or more. Ouch. Another big running back bites the dust early in the season.
Yeah, this one really hurts Arizona, and I know that that Greg, one of the other hosts on the show, for those if this may be one of your first shows, was a real big believer in Arizona taking the West this year. This doesn't help. Neither did Carson Palmer's 3 interceptions, but this seriously changes the dynamic of their offense. It's going to be a little bit more pass heavy. I don't think. Their backups are certainly not as dynamic as David Johnson, but they're going to have to rely a little bit more on throwing the ball to open up the run, I think, from here on out until David Johnson comes back. We hope he can be back as soon as possible, but who knows? I mean, wrists, you're going to take that pounding every time someone's trying to tackle you because they're going to go for the pole.
Yep. In terms of possible guys who could take over the role or who could not take over, but fill in for now, Kerwin Williams is listed as the number 2 running back on the depth chart. I trust him over Andre Ellington. Andre Ellington has been so bad as a running back, they were going to convert him to wide receiver this last year, which ended up not happening. Andre Ellington has proven to be good for half a game and then get injured. Usually it's either he pulls a hammy or he gets some sort of bruise on his thigh or his ribs or something that ends up taking him out of a game. So Andre Ellington is not an option. Your best option as a backup is going to be Kerwin Williams, which I actually drafted in the Scott Fish Bowl. So I've got him. So I can use him as a fill-in. So Kerwin Williams is going to be the better option. Neither one of them are great. Yeah, they're going to have to throw the ball around a lot more, and for Carson Palmer, that means a whole lot of interceptions. So,
yeah, I mean, Kerwin Williams, just to highlight it, did have 5 carries, only 10 yards, did get a touchdown, did catch the ball for 2 yards. So he averaged about 2 yards every time he touches the ball, which is not good. But if he gets a touchdown for every 6 times he touches the ball, that's pretty good numbers.
Yeah. Okay. Looking down. You see a lot of the news is a lot of the news stories have been about Robinson and Johnson. Let's see. Well, the fear in Chicago is that wide receiver Kevin White has broken his collarbone and will require season-ending surgery. This does not surprise anyone that he will most likely be out for the season again. So looks like your offensive options in terms of wide receivers there in Chicago are now who? Let's see, Kendall Wright and who else do they have? They have Marcus Wheaton. Is that who they have?
They do, but he's not going to do much.
No.
Not that very many, if at all, any of the wide receivers. They got Josh Bellamy, Kendall Wright. They've got a couple. They have bodies.
Yeah, they have bodies.
That's essentially what it is. No one that I think anyone would really start unless they are on a seriously depleted roster. But also, there's other guys you can pick up off waiver wires that will have more impact. This is in Chicago. It's really the running back show, I think, for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think Kendall Wright's the benefactor for the most part because he's the most experienced, probably the best wide receiver that they have now at this point.
Yeah, and even in that, I think he's really only valuable in a PPR standpoint because
as a slot guy, yeah
he's going to get underneath stuff. You're not going to throw the ball deep to him, which is really going to make the passing game a one-phase type of thing where all they're going to do is the short stuff. They don't have anybody they can throw the ball deep to at this point. So Jordan Howard and Tariq Cohen are going to face a lot of stacked boxes at this point for the rest of the season.
Yep. Let's see. CJ Fedorowicz had another concussion after clearing concussion protocol 2 days ago. Gets another concussion today, out for week 1. Tom Savage lasted 1 half. It is now the Deshaun Watson show in Houston, or at least it was for today.
I think it will continue to be that for a little while. I mean, he was on a short leash to begin with, and after what transpired, they only scored when Deshaun Watson was on the field. So
correct. I think it's the Deshaun Watson show now.
I think it's the Deshaun Watson show at this point.
Okay, you remember in our last show how I talked about how everyone in my work league was making fun of me for not taking Danny Woodhead because I draft him in every season, and I kept saying, yeah, he's going to continue to be available. Yeah, Danny Woodhead, already injured, grabbing his hamstring. That didn't take long. He did not return for the rest of the game.
He touched the ball 3 times and was done.
Let's see.
And really, most people who have considered themselves experts or anybody who does any sort of deep research and analysis, the only problem with Woodhead was injury issues. It wasn't the system. It wasn't anything else. So realistically, if you think Danny Woodhead is going to be someone who will be of value long term, he's going to need to sit 1 or 2 weeks to become 100% healthy before he becomes the Danny Woodhead that you remember from 2 years ago. Other than that, he's going to try and play through it, and he's just going to get dinged, and he's going to not play full games.
Yep. All right. Let me see here. That looks like as far as like news, the rest of it's all before the games actually started. So
there'll be a lot more tomorrow.
yeah, once we find out about more of these injuries that have happened. So
Thomas Rawls didn't play today, which I think is a little concerning. They do have depth at running. Well, they have a lot of bodies at running back for the Seahawks, but there were a lot of people who were taking Rawls in hopes that he would be the starter. After what I saw today, the line is so horrible. I don't know who could run behind that thing.
I mean, Chris Carson was able to make a little bit out of his carries.
He made
carries.
One carry for 30 yards. The other 5, he got 9 total.
And in those 9 yards, in those 5 carries, he was hit in the backfield on all 5 of them and managed to get 9 yards out of them.
Yep.
So
the offensive line just looked lost for most of the game, and I credit the scheme that the Packers used in blitzing. Kudos to the defensive coordinator, but I don't see the Packers now becoming a daunting defense. That's mostly because the Seahawks offensive line is offensive.
Yeah, it is.
So,
all right, I think that's pretty much all I've got for the news. Why don't we go into our Kings and Stings portion?
We'll get into Kings and Stings. So this is a new segment that we're introducing this year. And so what we want to do is highlight players who did much better than their projection. You won't get a lot of players in this who basically met the projection, had a good week, and there you go. So we'll start with the Kings. Obviously, King of the Week from the quarterback perspective is Alex Smith, doing something he has never done before and throwing for 368 yards. I don't think any other quarterback this week threw for over 300 yards.
There was a couple. Carson Wentz threw for 300.
Okay.
Who else? I think that may have been it. I'm pulling it up right now. So quarterback.
So Alex Smith is obviously King of the Week from the quarterback perspective. Matthew Stafford had a very, very rough first part of the game, but did very, very well throughout the second half of the game, getting 292 yards, 4 touchdowns. To start the game, I was a little nervous. There were a lot of people who believe that Matthew Stafford, after getting the payday, is going to have to rely a little bit more on the run and are less of a pass offense. From what I saw today in that game, Matthew Stafford is going to continue to throw the ball, and Detroit will continue to be Detroit in throwing the ball to open up anything else. As far as quarterbacks go, everyone else pretty much performed as expected or performed close enough to their projections on the positive side. On the Sting perspective, these are the players that really were painful to have on your roster today. Players like a Russell Wilson, who threw for 158 yards and 0 touchdowns, and in a lot of leagues got you around 8 points. This is not what you want from your quarterback. He was running for his life for most of the day. Really not the type of performance you would want from your quarterback. Another one, Eli Manning snuck it up tonight on the Sunday Night Football game. A lot of people thought that he would continue to produce even with Odell Beckham Jr. out. But realistically, Brandon Marshall was invisible, or Eli Manning was just ignoring him for most of the day. Another Sting, a couple more. Carson Palmer, 269 yards, 3 interceptions, 1 touchdown in the game against Detroit. This is a little surprising because Detroit is not necessarily known for their defense. They did surge towards the latter part of last year from the defensive perspective. Tom Brady, really only on the list because of no touchdowns. He was projected to be the number 1 quarterback of the week. Threw for 267 yards. Really good releases in the first half, but once Danny Amendola went out, he didn't have any touchdowns, 12 points. That's a -8 against projection. And then really the stinker of the week is Andy Dalton with 4 interceptions, a fumble, that he lost, and it was just atrocious. These are not the worst performances of the week. Tolzien was god-awful as well.
But you weren't expecting
Yeah.
anything out of him.
No one's starting Tolzien. And so the real point of these segments are these are players that you started, they're owned on basically 90% of rosters, and they just stunk the bed. So these are the ones that really hurt. We know they're on your roster, and these ones really, really hurt. Any comments on those selections from the Kings and Stings section of the quarterback perspective?
No, I mean, another guy that kind of stunk it up today. Did you mention Kirk Cousins and how bad he was?
I didn't.
because my two main quarterbacks that I had that were Kirk Cousins and Tom Brady. And so if we go to
Cousins was on the line. He was really only projected in some leagues in a 4-point touchdown league. He was only projected to get around 16 to 17 points, and he got 10. So here's on the border, but still painful. Painful, but not quite on a sting level.
240 yards, a TD, an interception, sacked 4 times. So if you have a league that is minus points for every time you get a quarterback takes a sack, which I haven't understood that one yet, which aren't always the quarterback's fault.
Yes.
And then 2 lost fumbles on top of that. So not exactly a stellar day for Kirk Cousins either.
What I do like, when you touched on the defensive note there, what I do like about ESPN's leagues is special teams touchdowns do not count against the defense this year.
Yeah.
On ESPN, and that's a standard scoring setting. So the only reason that would happen on ESPN is your commissioner went in and changed some things and those kinds of things. But we'll move on to the running back perspective, and we'll start with the Stings first. And there's really only three that really hurt, and they were all taken in the first round for drafts. Number 1, Le'Veon Bell, 10 carries, 32 yards. He did get a couple of catches out of the backfield, but playing the Browns without their number 1 pick,
even missing all of training camp.
Yeah, missing all of training camp, all of the things, and then the Steelers got the number 1 corner from the Browns. So the Browns are missing tons of stuff on defense, and you got 32 yards?
32, yeah, he finished with 47 yards. It was his lowest yardage output since his 4th game as a rookie back in 2013.
Now, one of the things that may have played a part in that is Ben Roethlisberger was basically looking for Antonio Brown whenever he could.
Well, can you blame him? I mean, what did AB?
Yeah, we'll get to that one. We'll get to Antonio Brown here when we cover the wide receivers. But moving on to other Stings, David Johnson, 11 carries, 23 yards, 6 catches, 68 yards. So not atrocious, but he really got cut off because of the injury to his wrist.
Correct.
He was not really able to run at all. I think that's a common thread for most of the teams, unless your name is Fournette, Hunt, Howard, Cohen. There were not really a lot of solid running performances so far this week. There were a couple of which I'll touch on, but also DeMarco Murray, 60 total yards, couldn't get hardly anything going in the running game, and that was from a perspective of Tennessee in general.
Yeah.
Henry had like 25 yards on 6 carries, so he had an average day. But really a team that did a lot from the running perspective last year with DeMarco Murray, Henry, and Mariota didn't really get a whole lot done against the Raiders. And so those are really the ones that hurt the most. There were some other questionable and horrible running back outcomes, but those were the ones that really sting. From King's perspective, we'll start at the bottom and work our way up. The one that I put at the number 5 spot, and I put him here because of how much he had been forgotten in the drafts, and that's Jonathan Stewart. 65 yards, 2 catches for 17, and a touchdown. He's still highly used for the Carolina Panthers. They are going to ease McCaffrey in. Reports before the game
we saw that today.
Yeah, was that McCaffrey was going to get about 10 to 15 touches for the game. We did see that even though McCaffrey was way more explosive than Stewart, they were going to rely on Jonathan Stewart. Jonathan Stewart is a great player to still have as a flex option if you're going to go on the running back route. So that's why I had him as a king, because from a projection standpoint, he blew it out. Leonard Fournette, a great first game, hit 100 yards right on the button, 1 TD against a Houston defense that I expected a little bit more out of, playing at home, having some energy, wanting to play well for the hometown fans after the hurricane, much like the Saints did after the Hurricane Katrina, and played really, really well in their first home opener after that. Unfortunate natural disaster, but Leonard Fournette really did a good job, and I think you'll see more of this now that Allen is out. They're going to rely a little bit more on the running game because they have proven that Leonard Fournette can rush the ball, and their defense played surprisingly well. Now, obviously, the Texans are not a juggernaut on the offensive side, but still a great performance from the Jaguars. I think they're the 1 or 2 in terms of fantasy points this week. Moving on to the number 3, King, third place this week. Tyreek Cohen, 5 rushes for 66 yards, 8 catches for 47 yards and a touchdown. He's the number 1 receiver for the Bears. I'm a little nervous at how much this eats into Howard's production this year, but I think this is more the fact that the Bears literally have no one to throw to. So if I was the Bears coach, you run a 2 running back set, double tight ends, you run everything short, and hope to God that Cohen or Howard can break something loose.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that this, we talked in the preseason about how they wanted to expand Jordan Howard's role a little bit in the passing game. For me, I just think this goes on to confirm that Tariq Cohen will be the pass catching back in this offense. They are still going to rely heavily on Jordan Howard. Because what did you actually say? What did Jordan Howard finish with?
I didn't.
I want to say it was. I think it was.
He did have a touchdown, some rushing yards.
I think it was 76 yards and a TD. So he had a decent game. I think that really, I think that Tariq Cohen is going to be a monster this year. So,
yeah, Howard ended up with 13 carries, 62 yards, a touchdown, 3 of 5 receiving, 14 yards. So really, Tyreek is the pass catcher. But unless you were a running back for Chicago, you didn't score a touchdown today. So, and then going to number 2 is Mike Gillislee. With all of the bodies that are back there for the Patriots in terms of the running game, Mike Gillislee clearly was the go-to guy in the first game for touchdowns close to the red zone. He did get 45 yards, 15 carries, 3 touchdowns. What concerns me is that there were 2 fourth and short conversions that Mike Gillislee, guy who's supposed to pound the rock, failed to convert. And I think that was a lot of the change in momentum for the Patriots against the Chiefs. And I think there could be something there to where, once again, Belichick's not going to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. He's going to surprise you. So Mike Gillislee did very, very well. I know tons of people who did not even start Mike Gillislee, so that one kind of stings from the Kings' perspective because you didn't play him. But King of the Week, and this is to no surprise for anybody who watched Thursday Night Football, after that game, this was going to be a very, very hard performance to outdo, and it came from a guy who did it in his first game. King of the Week goes to Kareem Hunt for setting the record for most yards from scrimmage in an NFL debut. A lot of people want to talk about that they knew about Kareem Hunt before anybody else did. I don't want to do a humble brag here, but what I'll say is you had an interview with one of their play-by-play guy,
The
correct?
play-by-play guy from Toledo, from the University of Toledo, where he played.
And that was before the draft, correct?
Correct.
So we were on Hunt before the draft, and then he landed at Kansas City, and since then we talked about him almost weekly.
That he was going to. We knew from as soon as he went to Kansas City, we knew he was going to take over that role from Spencer Ware at some point. We weren't expecting Spencer Ware to get injured and have it happen that way, but it still happened. And so, What do you know?
Yeah, so I was shocked that it came against the Patriots, who was a fairly good defense, but there were some key injuries. Devonta Hightower had an injury, and then almost on the next play, they throw an out or they throw basically a wheel slash down the field throw.
Post, yeah.
Hunt, he just blasts them for 70-plus yards, just running right past people. But Kareem Hunt, king of the week, highest scorer by far, 44 points, 44 to 46 points, depending on your scoring. Undoubtedly, king of the week. So from that point, anything about running backs that you want to talk about before we get into the wide receiver section?
No, I think personally, I'm good. You pretty much hit it all on the head with the guys who had the good weeks. I mean, there really was not. To be honest, there really wasn't a whole lot to look forward to or to really be happy about with the running backs in general this week. So,
not really, but we haven't gotten to the wide receivers yet. So we'll start with stings here again from the wide receiver perspective, starting with tonight's performance. Brandon Marshall, 1 catch, 10 yards.
Cut his butt.
Your thoughts.
Oh gosh, yeah. I thought, we had a discussion about this in the Skull King leadership chat, and let's be honest, Brandon Marshall was showing some signs of going down last year. It didn't help that Fitzgerald threw more interceptions and touchdowns last year, and they were that whole team was just a crap show last year. But he was showing some signs of getting older. Eli Manning was also showing some signs of a little bit of signs of getting older last year. I think what doesn't help the most, what hurts the Giants the most, and Brandon Marshall and the Eli Manning connection is, one, Odell wasn't there to take attention away from Brandon Marshall. So Brandon Marshall was going up against number one. He's not a number one anymore. 2, their offensive line is almost as bad as the Seahawks. I mean,
well,
Eli Manning had almost no time to pass the entire. I mean, from the sections of the game that I was able to watch, Eli Manning was having to move around it in the pocket, scrambling around himself all the time as well.
Well, to me, if you're going to be playing the Giants, why would you ever defend the run? For the last, I said this in the last show, for the last 3 years, they have been historically the worst team in running production for the last 3 years. No other team has had under 4 yards per carry consistently for 3 consecutive years. And they're like at 3.2, 3.4.
Yeah.
So why would you ever guard against the run? Add an additional corner, take away the passing game, because that's really all they're going to have to move the ball.
Yep.
And so I didn't think that this would happen because I'm high on Manning this year. I think this was just a bad day. I think the Cowboys were excited, and it was interesting to think about this a week ago. Would you have thought that the Cowboys had Ezekiel Elliott and the Giants would be without OBJ?
No.
So just from that perspective, it was a complete change for the game. Yep. I think the Giants defense did what it could, considering that the Giants offense couldn't do anything.
Yep.
But we'll move on to a couple of the other stings, and we'll get back to this game here in just a second.
Real quick, we've had a couple comments. Basically, it's Grandma Dorothy saying hi.
Oh, Hi, Grandma. Uh, T.Y. Hilton, 3 catches, 57 yards.
Okay, this is expected though.
This one doesn't sting to me because I didn't draft T.Y. Hilton. I wanted nothing to do with T.Y. Hilton. But for those of you who still thought to start T.Y. Hilton because he'd be the only receiving option, shame on you. 3 catches, 57 yards. It is 8 points in most PPR leagues. But coming from a guy that you probably had to draft in round 2 or 3, that hurts, especially in week 1.
Yep.
Moving on, Dez Bryant, 2 catches, 43 yards.
Yeah.
He was peppered with targets. I think he had 9 targets.
Yep.
He had 4 on the first drive and was only able to catch 1.
Yep.
Prescott was throwing the ball high a lot early. He threw the ball over Bryant's head. Those 3 misses were all high over his head. Dez Bryant's trying to raise one arm above his head in order to try and catch the ball. So I think that is more the ampedness of still a young quarterback in Dak Prescott. But still, I don't know how much chemistry is there considering how long Dez Bryant was out last year. Dak Prescott continued to produce without Dez Bryant last year, so he could produce this year without Dez Bryant. Not that Dez Bryant's going to drop off the planet, but I think this won't be as much of a shocker throughout the year because Dak likes Cole Beasley, Jason Witten as reliable targets to check down to.
Yep.
Do you have a comment?
Nope.
Moving on, another one that hurt was Kelvin Benjamin against the 49ers, who have been an atrocious defense over the last couple of years with some turnover on the defensive side. 1 catch for 25 yards from Cam Newton. Cam Newton did throw 2 touchdowns today, but only 1 catch from Kelvin Benjamin hurts because this is another guy that a lot of people were really high on.
Yep.
Hurts for week 1.
Yep.
Really stings for those of you who grabbed him in round 4 or 5, depending on where your leagues were at. Moving on, Martavis Bryant. Basically, it stung for anybody who was a Steeler who you would traditionally draft outside of Antonio Brown.
Basically.
Martavis Bryant, 2 catches for 14 yards. With as much as he was hyped by everyone, and I was a little bit on the hype train, a little nervous with Roethlisberger and a road game, and we've talked ad nauseum how much the point swing is for Roethlisberger between home games and away games.
Correct.
This was an away game, although it was the Browns with a depleted offense. Martavis Bryant, only 2 catches for 14 yards, really stings because he's, in a lot of leagues, he's the number 2 receiver for teams or your first flex option. So he probably started in every league that he was drafted, unless someone went absolutely no running backs and took a whole bunch of receivers to begin with.
Yep.
And my final one, because we want to try and stick the stings and the kings to about 5 as the ones that hurt the most. Sticking in the same game, Kenny Britt, 1 catch, 13 yards. He's supposed to be the number 1 target and the deep threat for DeShone Kizer, who can launch the ball. There was an unfortunate drop on a deep ball. Kenny Britt just flat out dropped it Ted Ginn style. And so it just didn't work today. I think that's a lot of rookie chemistry with Kenny Britt. So this could be a longer haul. I've got to look at the matchups for next week. I do have Kenny Britt in a couple of my leagues. I may choose to sit him until Kenny Britt can prove it, depending on how things go. There was a lot of people who had Buccaneers and Dolphins that were forced to do some different things in week 1.
That was one of them.
And I would have started Devontae Parker above Kenny Britt, and that one stings. Moving on to the Kings. of the week for the wide receiver section. Coming in at number 4, we have Golden Tate, 10 catches, 107 yards. Still the number 1 target for Matthew Stafford on a pass-first offense.
Yep.
Followed up at number 3, Kenny Golladay, only 4 catches,
But
69 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is the guy that they're going to go to in the red zone for touchdowns. 1 touchdown was one over the middle. I think like a 35 to 40-yard touchdown. An insane catch, great catch. He will be a very coveted person on the waiver wire, but we'll talk about waivers on tomorrow's show.
correct.
But Kenny Golladay, as much as he was hyped, and there was a joke on Twitter about him being the number 1 receiver above Antonio Brown, as he was hyped through all social media outlets after his 2-touchdown game in preseason. Starts with 2 touchdowns in the first game against a very good Cardinals defense.
Yep.
That's a solid performance. More than likely did not start on anybody's rosters, but a very, very good Kingley performance.
Yep.
Coming in at number 2, Tyreek Hill from the Thursday night game. 7 catches, 133 yards, 1 touchdown. A lot of those yards came from the one deep bomb that he
Correct.
caught from
Yep.
Alex Smith, but still he's going to get a lot of targets. You take away that catch, 6 catches for 63 yards, no touchdown. It gives him about 12 points, which is a little lower than what his prediction would have been. But still, Tyreek, great week with that deep bomb. And the number 1 wide receiver of the week, obviously Antonio Brown, coming in and doing his Antonio Brown thing. 11 catches on 11 targets.
Yeah.
Every time the ball was thrown to him, even the one that got tipped by the Browns defender, Antonio Brown caught and then proceeded to run another 30 yards with it.
Correct.
He did not, however, get a touchdown. So all of his production came on yardage and catches.
And first downs if you have a scoring setting with first downs.
Yeah, and so he's the number 1 receiver of the week.
And he didn't even score a touchdown.
Just on yards. Kenny Golladay was the number 2, and he had 2 touchdowns. So Antonio Brown, kudos to you who grabbed him. Great week from Antonio Brown, which you will continue to see throughout the season. But more than likely, he will end up as a Sting at least once this year. We get
probably whatever week Ben Roethlisberger goes down.
Yeah, whatever week he goes down, because that will more than likely happen.
Yep.
Moving on to the tight end section, which is the last positional section. I didn't want to cover kickers because everyone hates kickers. And defenses are wild card and streamable anyway, although the Rams did very, very well and the Jaguars did very well.
So did the Steelers.
Stream anyone who plays the Colts at the moment because that was awful.
The Colts, the Jets, the Browns.
Great win for McVay in his first coaching experience. Goff looked like the number 1 pick of a draft, and I think you will continue to see production from him. Maybe not to the level of what you saw today, because the Colts were depleted with already some injuries and then a young core after that. But moving on to the tight ends, the Kings of the week. We're going to go with Charles Clay. As much as I don't like mentioning his name, but considering it's the Bills, Charles Clay, who I thought was going to be to just disappear, has reemerged because of the trade of Sammy Watkins.
Yep.
The retirement of Anquan Bolden, as short as that was lived. And just really a lack of other receiving targets to throw to. I mean, Zay Jones, okay, cool. Matthews came in kind of late. Not a lot of chemistry there yet. I perceive that to to produce more. And secretly, nothing against Charles Clay. I'm hoping that this is the only time we ever announce him on the Kings side, because he's just one of those aggravating guys you always see on the waiver wire who you pick up to cover that 1 week,
And then
he does nothing. But he's intriguing enough that he's your number one choice on waiver pickups for your tight ends.
Yep.
Number 3, Jason Witten. Very, very good performance from him tonight. 7 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown, proving that Father Time apparently is never going to catch up with Jason Witten. And there was a quote from him before the game started that he hasn't even considered retirement yet. It's like,
his knees
how
will.
long do you want to play?
His knees will pretty soon.
Well, yeah, but it's just one of those things that great performance from him tonight. Just looking up, yeah, he's 35 years old. That's a lot for a tight end.
Yeah.
But Mr. Cowboy, I know he's approaching. I'm not sure if he got it tonight, but he is approaching the career reception yards total.
He passed it tonight.
He passed it tonight. So
For the Cowboys.
Congratulations to Jason Witten for being the all-time leading receiver as a Cowboy, as a tight end. A lot of that has to do with you've only ever played there. Coming in at number 2 on the Kings side for tight ends, Austin Hooper, who I jokingly said had a Tyreek Hill kind of day from last year, and he had 2 catches, 128 yards, and a touchdown. One of those catches was 80-something yards.
88, yeah.
88 yards with a beautiful stiff arm to what looked like a child in the corner from Chicago. And then his other catch was another 40-yarder.
Yeah.
And so I was expecting more involvement from Austin Hooper. I think there was just a little bit of some chemistry issues from the Falcons. They did not do that great, in my opinion. The Falcons
Not
should
playing
have
against Chicago.
rushed Chicago.
Yeah.
They couldn't get anything going on the running game, but still Freeman produced a touchdown, which is what saved his value for the week.
Correct.
But coming in at number 1 from the tight end section, Jesse James from the Pittsburgh Steelers. 6 catches, 41 yards, 2 touchdowns.
Yep.
So I want to highlight this one because we talked about this a little bit before the season started, I think on the last episode, about when we talked about Vance McDonald coming to the Steelers and Roethlisberger not really utilizing the tight ends that much.
Yep.
Do you think this changes anything, or is this just another one of those Jesse James great games like he had last year and then he disappears? What is your thoughts on Jesse James? I know we'll cover him a little bit more tomorrow, but from a perspective today, just because we talked about not really going after a tight end from Pittsburgh, is Jesse James worth your number 1 spot from a waiver wire pickup perspective in the tight end selections?
No. And here's why. For me, let me actually pull up Jesse James here. Just so that I've got it. Yeah, here's the deal. He was playing against the team, the defense last year that gave up the second most fantasy points to tight ends. And so I think this was more of a matchup thing. At least that's all I can see it as right now. Could it become more? Absolutely. But I'm not seeing that yet. I want to wait and see a little more consistency. I mean, if you're streaming tight ends, who they play next week, they play Minnesota. I'm not so sure that that's going to be a great matchup. It will be at home. But Minnesota has a pretty...
Roethlisberger's good for 35 points.
But I mean, playing against Minnesota, Minnesota does have a tough defense, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm not necessarily looking at him having a great week next week. I would maybe let other people pick him up to play him next week find out he's not going to have a great week and let them drop him, and then you can pick him up after that when he goes against Chicago, Baltimore, Jacksonville.
Just to give it context, last year for the entirety of the year, he had 40 catches or 39 catches, 340 yards, and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So even last year with Ladarius Green out basically the entire season, he has not proven this is an outlier game. As much as everyone wants to hype on the bandwagon on week 1 and go waiver wire gonzo in week 1, trust your draft. Trust Jesse James was not someone that you would want to pick up and start. Maybe you waiver wired him in a deep bench in a deep league. But really not someone that you're really going to want to let somebody else try and pick him up and eat that horrible score, because he'll more than likely be on a sting next week if people are going to start him enough.
Yep.
But now we get on to the stings, which is the sting list for tight ends and receivers was huge, and I had to limit this to 5. But I'm going to start with sting number 1, Eric Ebron, 2 catches, 9 yards.
Yeah, moving on.
Stafford threw 4 touchdowns, lots of yards, lots of catches. Eric Ebron was basically invisible.
Correct.
The next one that hurts, and this one hurts because of Andy Dalton, Tyler Eifert. 1 catch, 4 yards. But basically no one other than A.J. Green was relevant fantasy-wise from the Bengals.
Correct.
Mixon wasn't relevant, and a lot of people started Mixon thinking that he was going to produce because Hill was out and Giovanni is not that great. But Giovanni is a solid flex player for PPR leagues. And until I see Mixon do it in a regular season game and produce, I would still start Giovanni over Mixon.
Here's one issue that's going to have to be dealt with for, let me pull it up here real quick. Which one was it in? I want to say it was in here. I saw someone post this about here it is. The offensive line for the Cincinnati Bengals and how they played today. Their offensive line rating from fantasy football, was it from Pro Football Focus? Their highest rated offensive lineman got a 49.6% today. I got a 49.6 rating. 33.9, 42.6, 38.8, 36. It doesn't matter who you have running behind that line.
Yeah.
And that's like Seahawks bad line right
You
there.
could have Walter Payton running back there, and he won't go anywhere.
He's not going anywhere. So unless they can get some things figured out on that line, the running backs in Cincinnati are going to have trouble. I have Mixon to hold on to for a while. I knew I was going to have a hard time winning one of my matchups, so I went ahead and started him anyways just to see. I think that by the end of the season, Mixon still comes out on top in terms of fantasy relevance in that backfield. But for now, really, they're going to continue to play a 3-headed monster committee game. And so for now, I would leave that backfield alone until we see them perform better.
Yeah, I would advise not to start Mixon anytime soon. I would advise you to wait till he produces something that forces your hand to start him, because he had 8 rushes for 9 yards, and one of those carries was for 8 yards. So the other 7, he got 1 yard. So line issues, Giovanni Bernard on 7 rushes was able to get 40. Hill on 6 rushes was able to get 26. So both of those were plus 4 yards per rush, and Mixon struggled. So we'll get off of Cincinnati here. The next one up, number 3 on the sting category for tight ends, was Jimmy Graham with 3 catches for 8 yards.
Yep.
Jimmy Graham was absolutely mugged in the end zone by 2 guys. Without a penalty thrown.
Yep.
Now I can see the perspective of it being uncatchable, but there was no signal made by the refs that would justify it uncatchable. There was no uncatchable signal. They just said incomplete pass, yet he was absolutely mugged in the end zone. Really, the Seahawks just struggled today throughout the game. Probably just should have stuck to throwing the ball because that's where they were really able to move the chains. But Jimmy Graham did not have a great day. 3 catches at 8 yards. Not a good day. The next one, Greg Olsen, 2 catches, 18 yards. Now, what concerns me here is that though Cam Newton threw 2 touchdowns, and the running game did pretty well, is Greg Olsen, do you fear that Greg Olsen is not going to live up, granted 1 game in, do you feel based off of what you've seen from Cam Newton and our conversations about him not having the greatest arm down the field? He did have 1 touchdown throw for 40 yards today.
Yeah.
But if he's going to be in the pocket and not being able to throw the ball really from the run, does that hinder Greg Olsen's value, who was probably taken 4th or 5th round, probably the 3rd or 4th tight end off the board, probably 3rd off the board in most leagues? What is your, after 1 week, what's your thoughts on Greg Olsen?
I'm holding off on matchups for now. If I've got a second tight end, I will basically see who has the better matchup. And here's the thing: that 40-yard touchdown that Cam Newton threw for, it was a 15-yard out route that was poor tackling, and was it Russell Shepard or whatever the guy's name was? Basically got past the defender on a bad tackle and ran at the extra 25 yards for the touchdown. So,
yeah.
So Cam Newton's still having issues with his shoulder. Obviously, he didn't play a whole lot in the preseason. So for now, I'm cautious about any of the receiving options for the Carolina Panthers. I have Greg Olsen on 1 team and will actually in 2 teams. I will continue to play him, especially since he's my best tight end, and based on matchups. Carolina got up by enough; they didn't need to pass the ball, so they could just run the ball. There's going to be times where they're going to have to throw the ball, and in that case, Greg Olsen will be a recipient there. But for now, as long as they can protect Cam Newton's shoulder as we move into the season, as we go farther into the season, Greg Olsen will pan out and have better games. But for now, yeah, I can see him having a couple more stinkers in here while we're waiting for Cam Newton's shoulder to completely heal up and gain some strength.
Yeah. My concern is mostly Cam Newton. 14 completions, 25 attempts. I think they're going to keep him at around 25 attempts until we get to 4, 5, 6 weeks into the season. McCaffrey had 7 of the targets.
Yep.
Dumps out of the backfield. Kelvin Benjamin had 5, only had 1 catch. Olsen had 4. Everyone else is sitting around 2 targets.
Yep.
With only 25 throws. Yep. And Cam Newton's average of 60%, which he was below at 56 today.
Yep.
That's not a lot of catches for any receiver if that's what they're looking at. So I would be wary of starting an Olsen or a Kelvin Benjamin. Obviously, haven't looked at the matchup for next week, and we'll talk starts and sits in a couple of days. But that's something that could kind of concern me, especially after playing a San Francisco defense who has not been very good over the last couple of years. And our last sting of the week, once again, comes from the Thursday night game. Gronk, 2 catches, 33 yards. Unfortunately, he did have a touchdown taken away after a replay review.
Yep. But
Barry just shut him down throughout the game. But that won't happen. That won't happen again the rest of the year. Not only because Eric Berry unfortunately had an
tore his
ACL.
Tore his Achilles.
Sorry,
yeah.
had an Achilles injury and is out for the season. But there's really only like 2 players in the league that could match up on Gronk and do something like that. The other one's named Cam Chancellor, and the Patriots don't play the Seahawks this year in the regular season. So I do not expect Gronk to get absolutely shut down by anybody the rest of the season. But the other thing to account for is that Tom Brady does not force the ball to anyone.
No.
So that was more. That matchup was more because Eric Berry didn't really give a lot of windows
Nope.
to Brady, but look for Gronk to come back. I think he could be a king next week because no one's going to be able to shut him down like Eric Berry did.
Correct.
So
I agree with you there.
that wraps us up. Ryan, how about you take us into kind of our saviors of the week, if you will, coming into the Monday night games.
All right. So going into the Monday night games, let me make sure that we don't have. Okay, we don't have any ads coming up on this. Looking at possible players who could do well for you tomorrow, I like Dalvin Cook running against the New Orleans defense.
Yes.
I like Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. Personally, for me, I prefer Adam Thielen. He showed a real great rapport with Sam Bradford at the end of last year. Diggs has been struggling, as far as I can tell, with some drops, especially in the preseason. Kyle Rudolph is going to be a solid tight end option if you have not played it. If you're waiting on tight end, I think that he could have a good game against New Orleans. You talk about New Orleans. Michael Thomas, 92 receptions last year for 1,137 yards, 9 TDs. He is going to be hard to stop. But Drew Brees struggles away from home. Now it helps that he's going to be indoors.
It's also going to hurt against Michael Thomas. He's in Xavier Rhodes guarding him.
True, which very well could mean a decent game from Ted Ginn, believe it or not.
Senior maybe? Nope.
I like Mark Ingram more because of his pass catching ability. I think that will play better against the Minnesota Vikings than his running. I don't like Adrian Peterson. Usually you don't pick against a guy, going up against his old team. I think that Adrian Peterson's done. Personally, I think that he is done. I personally would rather have Alvin Kamara than Adrian Peterson, just because of his ability to possibly line up in the slot with Willie Snead gone, which is definitely something I'm going to be watching tomorrow with Willie Snead out for 3 games. So, those are some of the guys I'm looking at for this next game. I'm not looking at Kobe Fleener. So that's the first game tomorrow night. The other one is L.A. God, it's so weird to call them the L.A. Chargers. The Chargers and the Broncos. I don't necessarily like Phillip Rivers in this game because the Broncos last year had like the number 1 or number 2 pass defense. Their defensive backfield is just unreal.
Young and athletic.
Yes.
Young enough and good enough that they let TJ Ward go.
Yeah. So I don't like. I kind of like Melvin Gordon simply because of the matchup, though, because they had their defense struggled a bit against the run. So Melvin Gordon could be okay. Tyrell Williams is going to struggle. I think that Keenan Allen is going to struggle. I really don't see. I think their best bet for getting the ball going anywhere is going to be Hunter Henry, possibly Antonio Gates. So it's going to be tough for the Chargers, I believe, to move the ball. As far as the Broncos go, C.J. Anderson, I could see him having a decent game running the ball against the Chargers defense. Demaryius Thomas, I think could have an okay game. It all depends on how well Trevor Siemian can get the ball out. Again, not a whole lot of options there, in my opinion, in that game. You can go with Phillip Rivers. Just know that he's going up against an extremely athletic, very good defensive backfield that's playing at home.
Yeah. So let me ask you a couple of questions just to highlight the 2 games tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we had this conversation. Which quarterback do you like, Drew Brees or Sam Bradford?
I still like Drew Brees because of the amount that they're going to be passing the ball.
Yep. From a running back perspective, which running back would you rather have? Ingram, Peterson, or Dalvin Cook?
Considering the offensive line woes that the Vikings had all last year, but he is probably their best. He is their best running back. I'd probably because it's at home against the New Orleans defense, I probably would take Dalvin Cook.
Yep, I would probably do the same, or I would do the same. From a wide receiver perspective, which wide receiver do you think has the best game? Ginn, Thomas, Diggs, or Thielen?
Oh, good grief. Probably Stephon Diggs or Thielen.
I'm going to go Michael Thomas. He is the number one receiver without Snead there.
He's going to get targeted a ton.
Targeted a ton because he's got the most chemistry with Drew Brees. He's a big body for the red zone if and when they can ever get there. From the tight end perspective, do you see any universe where Coby Fleener outscores Kyle Rudolph tomorrow?
No.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the Chargers and Broncos. Which quarterback do you like better, Phillip Rivers or Trevor Siemian?
I still like Phillip Rivers better than Trevor Siemian, to be honest.
I do too. Phillip Rivers is just a better quarterback. He is going to throw some interceptions, probably one or two, maybe 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, kind of a game.
Yep.
From the running back perspective, Melvin Gordon or C.J. Anderson?
I'm going C.J. Anderson this game.
See, I'm going to go the other way. And just because C.J. Anderson struggled mightily last year, and Melvin Gordon, as much as I don't like him from a year-long perspective, thought his draft stock was a little too high for my taste, I think Melvin Gordon starts out of the gate very, very well against a team that's going to shut down the passing game, or at least attempt to shut down the passing game.
Yeah.
From a wide receiver perspective, which wide receiver do you feel is going to be the number one wide receiver from this game? Both Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders are projected to outscore Keenan Allen, but out of Thomas, Sanders, Allen, and Williams, which do you see being the number one receiver in PPR?
Well, if you're going to go, since we're a PPR, we're a PPR website. That's what we do. I probably have to go Allen simply because Phillip Rivers is just going to keep peppering him over and over and over with targets
for those 3 and 4 yard targets.
Yes.
I was going to go the exact same route. I think from a touchdown perspective, I think I give the edge to Demaryius, big body, anything in the red zone. I think they're going to target him a little bit more. Emmanuel Sanders for anything deep, but I think from a PPR perspective and catches, regardless of score, of how much total score, I think Keenan Allen has the most catches in the game, and that's why I give him a little bit of the edge in the game. From the tight end's perspective, any universe where Virgil Green outscores Hunter Henry?
No.
So let me ask you this.
Because Denver is terrible at using their tight ends.
Which tight end do you take, Hunter Henry or Antonio Gates? If you drafted both and you got to pick one to play tomorrow, because I know of a few people that drafted both, which I don't understand, but which would you take, Hunter Henry or Gates?
I take Hunter Henry.
Okay.
So good. I think the youth, for me, youth plays out there. Antonio Gates has had so many injury issues over the last few years. He's had a problem staying healthy for a full game, let alone for multiple games at a time. So last year they scored the exact same amount of touchdowns. And so I think that Hunter Henry in his second year gets even more involved in the offense, and so I take Hunter Henry over Antonio Gates.
Okay, well that I think that wraps up our show. If you want to name drop one of the sponsors, and then we can head out.
All right. Well, real quick, I just want to thank again our main sponsor, Vox DFS Firelines, for helping us put this show on. They are a premier DFS line consultant and provider website that they provide for NFL, Major League Baseball, NASCAR, you name the sport, they have lines for it. For those of you who do sports betting, they do have the ability to help you out with your sports betting now as well. So if you're betting, over-unders and covers and stuff for NFL games, they have the ability to help you out with that as well. So again, thank you again to Vox DFS. Make sure to go to voxdfs.com and let them know that the guys from Skull King Football sent you over there. And just so you know, I am actually one of the line writers for DraftKings on their website. So had a little bit of success today with the lines today. So make sure to go over to voxdfs.com to sign up with them. And I guess that is it. Again, make sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever, and do a review of our podcast, or even just simply give us a rating. We would greatly appreciate that. And I believe that is it. So again, thanks all for listening to the show tonight. With me tonight was Justin. My name is Ryan, and we'll see you guys next time. Hey, Skull King Nation, thank you for listening to the Skull King Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.